Battle-Born Bride, my work in progress. As you can see, I am at my main desk with the dual monitors, and I'm not showing you what's on this monitor because I don't want to give too much away. But if you are new here, Battle-Born Bride is the book that I plan to release in October of this year for Nevada Day 2026. And it will be a young adult historical fiction. Now, this started out as an adult historical romance, and I decided to switch things up a little bit because I don't think there is a lot of information available about the time period that I'm writing. So I think it would be a good resource for both young adults and adults, which is why I decided to make it a young adult, because I think it will reach a wider audience that way. So what I'm doing, I'll take you along on this process as I'm working on Battle-Born Bride. I currently have around 11,000 words written, and I don't think I will need to change much. I'm going to be tweaking things a little bit here and there just to get the book back up to speed for the new age group and the genre shift. It's not a huge shift. There will be a tiny bit of romance still included in it, but it will lean more heavily on history. And what I'm doing on this monitor is I currently have a timeline of historic events. Now, the inciting event, which will be the backstory, is Quantrill's raid on Lawrence, Kansas. And that sets things in motion, but that's not where the story starts. The story starts when the main character, Sarah Jane, and her mother, Constance, arrive in Carson City. Now, the date of their arrival, based on a variety of factors, Quantrill's raid happened on August 21st, 1863. From the research I've done, the victims of that raid were buried pretty quickly in a mass grave, and then there was a lot going on at that time period because of course, it was during the height of the Civil War. The Battle of Gettysburg had happened in early July of 1863, so there was a lot of fighting. There was especially a lot of fighting along the Kansas-Missouri border, and that's kind of what led into Quantrill's raid. So that's the backstory for the characters of Constance and Sarah Jane, and the reason why they came to Carson City was that Constance's sister and her husband went west to California in 1849 during the gold rush. After the gold played out, the two of them moved to Carson City and opened a boarding house because Carson City and Nevada were becoming more populated due to the discovery of silver on the Comstock. Now, I need to be careful about the exact dates when the silver was discovered because people had come back to Nevada from California. They were doing a little panning and things like that. And I need to nail down the specific date, when that discovery happened. So let me do that really quick right here. I'm just going to do a random Google search. Okay, so just generically, the Comstock lode was discovered in June of 1859. So, since my story takes place in 1863, 1864, it would be correct for me to say that Constance's sister and brother-in-law returned to Nevada because they'd hoped to capitalize off of the discovery of silver, because the gold had already played out in California. It had been a decade after the 49ers, and there were a lot of people who moved from California to Nevada. So I wanted to point that out specifically, which is why Constance's, that's going to be a difficult one to say, Constance's sister and brother-in-law did the typical 49ers rush to California, and then they came back to Nevada after the gold played out. Now, August 21st, 1863, Quantrill's raid on Lawrence, Kansas. The family of Constance and Sarah Jane, the father and two older brothers, were killed during the raid. Now, a lot of men died during that horrible event. I'm not going to go too deeply into those details because that's really not the focus of the story, but there will be elements that factor into the story later on. So the book will open with Constance and Sarah Jane arriving in Carson City. Now, one of the things I have open on my browser over here is called the Western Nevada Historic Photo Collection. And I refer to this quite frequently because they have a wonderful collection of photographs from all over Nevada, but also specifically Carson City. And there are some historic ones that date back to the beginning of Carson City, when there is a very famous one of a stagecoach on Carson Street, when Carson Street was still dirt, before the Capitol building had been built and things like that. So that gives me a little bit of background as to what it looked like in Carson City at that time. The other thing I have open in this tab is Chronicling America, which has scanned editions of historic newspapers from across the country. I'm specifically looking at Nevada newspapers. They do not have the 1863, 1864 newspapers for Carson City, which would have been, I think at that point, the Carson City Daily Appeal, potentially. Now, the Nevada Appeal is still active as a Carson City newspaper. It is published only a few times a week now because newspapers and news have changed so much. So, of course, it focuses mostly on local news and community events and things like that, instead of the national news that we get 24/7 on social media. So the Nevada Appeal, which would have then been the Carson Appeal or the Carson Daily Appeal, was not loaded to Chronicling America. I'm not sure, since the paper went through various iterations over the 160 something years, I think now, of Nevada statehood. The newspaper changed names and ownership and how often it was published and things like that pretty frequently. So it may be that there was a gap between when a certain edition was published before the next edition started. So what I have for that time period is the Gold Hill Daily News. And it doesn't have a lot of information about what was happening in Carson City. It was focused more on what was happening in Gold Hill and Virginia City on the Comstock. But occasionally they would have information about what was happening here in the Capitol, especially as it relates to the Constitutional Convention, which is what this book will be mainly focusing on. So once Sarah Jane and Constance come to Carson City, a series of events happens to them personally, but in the meantime, in the background, they're learning about Nevada because this is their new home. They have no plans to go back to Kansas because there is nothing left for them there. And they're trying to make a new life for themselves. So they're trying to learn what's happening around them. But more things, more tragic events happened because there was a lot of illness and death during that time period. And eventually, Sarah Jane ends up alone with her aunt and uncle. And she then really doesn't know what to do with herself because she has lost her entire family. And, she does know her aunt and uncle, but not as well as she knew her parents and her brothers. So she's in a haze. She's had all these traumatic experiences happen to her. She experienced the trauma of what happened in Lawrence. And some things happen at that time that trigger her trauma, because Mark Twain was becoming very well known. He had already started using the Mark Twain nom de plume, but he had come to Nevada as Sam Clemens with his brother Orion, because Orion was posted out here as the territorial secretary by President Lincoln. So Sam and Orion were in town. Sam was kind of going around doing things. They sometimes list him as the assistant secretary, but he really didn't do that very much. He didn't like to be tied down. He tried his own hand at prospecting every once in a while, and then he was working for newspapers. Now, during the Constitutional Convention, he was poking fun at the legislative process, and he started something called the Third House, which was a satirical group that met and kind of acted similar to what was happening with the Constitutional Convention. He was writing about it, but he also wrote some other things on the side. And some of the things he wrote, or at least one in particular, I won't go too deeply into that detail, but one of the stories that he wrote really triggers Sarah Jane. Now, Sarah Jane will have come across Mark Twain just, you know, occasionally, because since her aunt and uncle run a boarding house, he occasionally will come to dinner to meet with some of the people there. Now, the boarding house is fictional. Sarah Jane's family is fictional. And the main male character, who's the um, potential love interest of Sarah Jane, is also fictional. But there will be historic figures interspersed throughout the book, like Sam Clemens slash Mark Twain, Orion Clemens. Someone named J. Neely Johnson, who was a governor of California, came over and he was involved in the Constitutional Convention. And it's a very well known name to me due to my previous work at the Nevada State Archives. So I do have the 1862 Ormsby census. Now, between 1862 and 1864, a lot could have changed. People could have moved away, and it may not be completely accurate. But for the people that I know were in Carson City in 1863, 1864, I can refer to that 1862 Ormsby County census and maybe fill out their family members, for example. So I would know whether J. Neely Johnson's wife and children were with him and how old they would have been. That census doesn't have a lot of information. It's basically names and ages, I believe, and then by county. So Carson City was in Ormsby County at that time period, named for Major William Ormsby, who was out here, and he also started a hotel called the Ormsby House, which his wife took over after he was killed. And so historic figures like that will play into the story. But my fictional figures will be the ones experiencing the events around them. And since I am making this a young adult book, my hope is that the young adults in the book, because I'm thinking Sarah Jane will be probably around 17 years old. So she will be pretty close to adulthood, but she will still be a teenager. And it was not uncommon for people at that time period to get married young, especially as in the case of Sarah Jane, where she's losing her entire family. And then her aunt and uncle are trying to take care of her, but they know they won't be around forever. So they're hoping to get her settled. And since Sarah Jane really is dealing with all the trauma of what has recently happened to her and all of her loss, she may agree to do things that she would not have otherwise, because her personality has changed based on these events. And those are the things that I will be exploring in the book, along with giving all the historic details about what was happening in Carson City as Nevada was becoming a state. So the book will open on, let's see, it was September 30th, 1863, when Sarah Jane and Constance arrive in Carson City. And toward the end of the book, I'm not sure if the last chapter will be on October 31st, 1864, or there may be a little bit after that. I haven't quite decided where to end the book just yet, but it will be in 1864. There will be information about when Nevada was granted statehood on October 31st, 1864, and the events surrounding the creation of the Nevada Constitution, the approval of the Nevada Constitution. There will be some mentions of different battles that are happening during the Civil War, because that news would have been filtering west, and there will have been elections and all kinds of things happening that will be included in this book. So that's where I am on building Battleborn Bride. I have my timeline of historic events that I'm going to be fleshing out as I work. I have an outline of the book. So the outline is the fictional events happening around the historic events. So I'm blending the two pieces of information together as I'm building the book. Plus, I have the 11,000 plus words that I've already written that I will be finessing to fit into my new framework as I'm turning this into a young adult historical. So I'm going to continue to take you along on the ride as I'm working on this. And a couple more resources that I will be using are, there's a book called Everyday Life in the 1800s, and this is a Writer's Digest guide that I got many, many years ago, but it has information about specific things that were in use probably at the time period that I'm writing about. The other book I have is a History of Nevada in 1881. Now, this book was written after the time period that I'm writing about, but it talks about things like the inception of Carson City. There are some sketches of the houses that were in the area at the time, so I can get a general idea of how things looked. We do still have existing houses. For example, the Clemens house is still standing over on the west side of Carson City, and at some point I will do a video over there and show you the house. I also have, through the Western Nevada Historic Photo Collection, I have access to photos of earlier versions of the house before it was updated. And I will probably later this year be doing some videos talking about some of the locations that I'm writing about in my book. The nice thing about setting it here in Carson City is that if I ever feel the need for inspiration, I can go outside and just take a walk, especially on the west side of town, because that is a historic district with a lot of old houses that date back to early Carson City, not necessarily back to the 1863, 1864 era, but pretty close. And I can always have a look at the hills to the west and watch the sunrises and sunsets. I know what the weather is like. And by using Chronicling America, I can also find out what the weather might have been like at a particular time that the book is happening. I do know that the Nevada State Archives has some records, some meteorological records that track temperatures and snow and everything like that over a period of time. I don't think they date back early enough for them to be useful for this. I'm going to have to double check on that. But I will definitely be referring to the Nevada State Archives, going back to maybe refresh my memory on a few things relating specifically to the Constitution, because they do have the original Constitution at the Nevada State Archives. So that's my current plan. And like I said, I'm going to bring you along as I'm working on this, partially just to document the process of writing a book this way, and partially to hold myself accountable, because if I'm not working on my book, I'm not going to be too happy with myself. I have a deadline in mind for publishing this book. I'm usually a lot more flexible about my publication dates, but I want to get this book done. I've started it several years ago, and I feel like now is the time. I have some connections that will allow me to do some book release events. And I think it will be very helpful, hopefully, to students or anyone interested in history of any age level. It will be, like I said, young adult, but adults often read young adult books. They don't necessarily have to stop reading young adult when they age out of them. I mean, there are even children's books that some adults like to revisit now and then. So I'm hopeful that this book will appeal to a wide audience, even though I am gearing it toward young adult audiences. And even though I am titling it Battle-Born Bride, I'm hopeful that both people who are interested in history won't choose not to pick up the book based on the title. The reason I'm calling it Battle-Born Bride is because she ends up getting married. Spoiler alert. And it will be, as Nevada becomes a state, and we are the Battle-Born state. So it seemed like the perfect title. My working title is 3B. So if you hear me referring to 3B, it's because I don't feel like saying Battle-Born Bride. But if you are following along on this journey, you will become very familiar with what I'm working on as I keep you updated. My updates may be nothing more than, oh, I've gotten this many words done, and I'm this far along, or the book has gone into edits and now I'm doing this part of the process. So you will see from not the beginning, because like I said, I've already started writing this book, but you will see me drafting this book as I go. And I will hopefully have a few beta readers who will give me some input on the historical information that I'm including. I don't want to include too much and make it too dense like a textbook. I want it to be an enjoyable read, but I still want people to be able to read it and learn more about how Nevada became a state, because I think it's a fascinating period in time. Anyway, I've probably talked way too much about this now, and I really should get down to work. So just to let you know, let's see, yesterday we had quite a day here. JT and I got the day started with some interesting news. He got a wonderful review of Finding Salvation, which is coming out next week. So, as I said, if you are in Carson City, please join us at Comma Coffee on Tuesday, March 17th, 2026 at 9 a.m. As you can see, I'm wearing an appropriate t-shirt, Trinity College in Dublin. I actually did get this at Trinity College in Dublin when we visited Ireland, but I'm not entirely sure how we ended up picking St. Patrick's Day as the release date. The book was ready to go, and we just kind of pulled it out of a hat. We thought it might be a fun day to do a release, even though the book really isn't related to Ireland specifically. Even, of course, one of the main characters, his name is Francis Murphy, so that sounds Irish. But definitely check out Finding Salvation. As I said, we have limited copies available right now in our bookstore. Those copies will be going with us to Comma Coffee, so they might not be available after Tuesday. We'll see how this goes. But definitely, you can check it out at all of our different platforms, which can be found at our website, www.carsonhume.com. If you want to follow along there and you sign up for our newsletter, you will get the first um, novella of that novella trilogy free in either EPUB or PDF format. And that way you can check out the book. And if you decide you like it, then it will give the website will give you all the information on where you can find a copy. So I do hope you will check it out. JT is very excited about this book release, and I'm hoping that readers will also be very excited. And let's see, the other thing that happened yesterday that wasn't quite so exciting was I had a dental appointment. So I'm feeling my mouth, and it was just a cleaning, but anybody who does these on a regular basis knows that sometimes they could be a little uncomfortable. And I am feeling that today. So getting down to work is a little bit of a challenge, but it is what it is. Sometimes we work even when we don't feel like it, especially if we have put ourselves on a tight deadline. Now, my goal, I've mentioned when I want to release the book. My goal is to have a draft of this book complete before JT and I hit the road. And our plan is to go on our road trip starting sometime in mid-April. So that gives me a little, maybe a 5-week-ish time period to draft this draft of my work in progress. So, got lots to do. Got to get back to work. I thank you for joining me today. I hope you're having a wonderful day and week. I'm Cassidy Carson, and this is The Life of a Writer. Take care.